Greetings to you all, friends of Mennonite Central Committee. Very glad that you have joined us today for what is our fifth MCC webinar. We call these our behind the scenes looks at MCC's work. Today, our title is Working Toward Right Relationships, Stories from MCC's Indigenous Neighbours. So, very glad you've joined us. Welcome. We have people joining us through Zoom and a few people also on Facebook Live. Generally, we are a multinational gathering from people around the world, really. So thank you, first of all, not only for joining us, but for your interest in MCC, for your support for MCC's work. We're really thrilled that you're part of the story, part of the MCC story, and thrilled that we can offer you this unique view of the way we serve together in the name of Christ. My name is Rick Kober-Bauman, and I serve as the Executive Director of Mennonite Central Committee Canada. And today I'll be your host. I'm coming to you from a tiny hamlet of Shakespeare, about an hour and a half west of Toronto, Ontario. Now, for those of you who are regulars with us here, you'll know that you'll be kept muted on Zoom throughout the webinar. But we are really eager to hear from you. Please do send in your questions through the Q&A function, and you can find that at the bottom of your screen. There's a toolbar there marked Q&A. And if you've joined via Facebook, you're encouraged to submit questions through the Facebook comments section. Through comments, we will be picking up those and the Q&A Zoom questions, and they'll get fed to me. We might not get to answer all your questions. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. And we are recording, so if you have to step away for a while, or you have a friend that you think would enjoy this, please let them know. It will be made public after the presentation. So to tonight's webinar, Stories from MCC's Indigenous Neighbours program, I want to say a special welcome to our two presenters, to our two guests. We've been working hard to build respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in MCC Canada for decades, actually, for over 50 years. In all the programs where we work with Indigenous communities, we rely heavily on partnerships and working with knowledge of Indigenous people to guide that work. So tonight, we are really happy to have Bridget Finley, who gives leadership to our Indigenous Neighbours work in MCC British Columbia. Welcome, Bridget. And a friend of MCC's partner, Beverly Lightfoot, also now in British Columbia, but originally from the Moosomin Reserve in Saskatchewan. So Bridget and Beverly, in that order, will take about 20 minutes or so of our hour to do a presentation. They have PowerPoints, so lots of visuals, and then we'll have lots of time for questions. So please do be thinking about those and sending them in. A little more about our guests. Beverly Lightfoot, of Cree and Ukrainian descent. Beverly is a wife and a mother of 4. She was born in Saskatchewan, as I said, belongs to the Moosomin Reserve, and has experienced firsthand the intergenerational impacts of the Indian residential school system. She is a registered nurse and is honored to share her experience with us. We also found out in the lead up here as we were doing our tests that she spends a lot of time with family baking. So we were all a little sad that this was only a virtual experience tonight and we couldn't taste her blueberry and chocolate wares from earlier today. So glad to have you with us, Beverly. And Bridget, as I said, MCC BC, Indigenous Neighbours Coordinator, working hard to build respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people with a special focus on church groups in BC, but also working with school groups, community groups, and very interested in learning more about and working at reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So we're going to invite Bridget to start us off tonight. Welcome to all of you, especially Beverly and Bridget. Over to you, Bridget.
Thank you for that introduction. I've enjoyed my many years working at MCC, and I want to start this evening by recognizing that I'm on the Coast Salish territory, the land of the Stolo people, and more specifically, the ancestral land of Sumas First Nation and Matsqui First Nation. We're very grateful to God, our Creator, who placed us here to share this land with them, to work towards respectful relationships and peace, and to be good stewards of the land, which sustains us and gives us life. I also want to take this opportunity to share a little bit about my own heritage. Although I am mostly of European descent, I'm also 1/8 Native American on my father's side. I was born in the United States, and I learned around the age of 8 or 9 years old that I had an Indigenous ancestry, the Creek Native Americans. So I mention this because over the past 5.5 years that I've been in this role of the MCC Indigenous Neighbours Coordinator, I've developed friendships with Indigenous people who continue to challenge me to claim that part of my ancestry and to learn more about it. I sincerely appreciate their words of encouragement to actually discover more about myself and my family. Many people ask me why MCC has an Indigenous Neighbours program in North America. This question is so clearly answered in MCC's mission and vision statement. Our mission expresses that we are a worldwide ministry of Anabaptist churches sharing God's love and compassion for all in the name of Christ by responding to basic human needs and working for peace and justice. If we take a closer look at that mission statement, in the name of Christ, we respond to basic human needs. We have Indigenous communities, particularly in the more remote parts of Canada where they don't actually have clean water and resources to grow food for their communities. Many Canadians don't know about the conditions that they endure, and our MCC Indigenous program, particularly in Ontario, works at responding to some of those basic needs. In the name of Christ, we work for peace and justice, and many Canadians do not know the colonization history of Canada and the abuse and the potential elimination that Indigenous people experienced through 7 generations. Many people do not understand the systemic issues that Indigenous people still face today and the intergenerational impacts of this history. Our MCC Indigenous Neighbours program works at informing and facilitating educational workshops so people understand this history. The MCC vision statement proclaims that we envision communities worldwide in right relationships with one another, with God, one another, and creation. Our Indigenous Neighbours program exemplifies this vision of working at right relations, reconciled and respectful relationships that honor Indigenous people, including their culture, their worldview, their spirituality, and their focus on caring for creation. As Christians, we are called to be reconcilers, individually and collectively as Jesus followers. So I want to start off by sharing a story about Cedar Park Church in Ladner. So you'll see that picture on the screen there of Ruth Adams from Tsawwassen First Nation and Lee Kosa from Cedar Park Church. I was invited to do an adult Sunday school series for Lent several years ago on the doctrine of discovery. It was a concept used to justify colonization and the taking of land from Indigenous people. It was a 6-week series, and Ruth Adams agreed to be a guest for one of those Sunday mornings. And she shared about her childhood and the trauma of going to residential school. She shared about the Indian Act and not being able to leave her reserve. And she shared about resilience and learning and preserving her culture. She really shared what reconciliation means to her and to the people at Tsawwassen First Nation. After that, I was asked to come back probably a month or so later to do the Kairos blanket exercise. Ruth again came along with Melanie to watch and witness the learning that happens at the Kairos blanket exercise. Cedar Park shared that with their members, but they also shared it with their community in their community newsletter. And we had 85 people attend that event. The next slide there will show a little bit of the exercise. Yeah, there we go. And so you can see Ruth Adams in the background. You can see Melanie playing her drum for the event. The Kairos blanket exercise is a participatory workshop that walks the participants through Indigenous Canadian history from pre-discovery to present. It's a pretty, because you're actually acting out the history, it's a pretty emotional exercise, and it's a very powerful tool. I have facilitated it almost 50 times now for churches, at schools, and for community groups. Since that evening at Cedar Park, several Indigenous speakers have shared on Sunday mornings, including Ruth. Members of Cedar Park have been invited to go on reconciliation walks and to attend National Indigenous Peoples Day events at Tsawwassen First Nation. Their openness to building relationship between Tsawwassen and Cedar Park was very apparent and part of their hearts. This is a good example of how a church can take on the ministry of reconciliation in an Indigenous community and how they can share and work together to improve their community. The next story I want to share with you is about Level Ground Mennonite Church. Last summer, I met with the pastors to talk about the Indigenous Neighbours program and how I could work with their church. And they asked me to actually speak on Peace Sunday by sharing a sermon on reconciliation, and then to lead 3 educational sessions the following 3 Tuesday evenings. So right away, the Kairos blanket exercise was one of the ones they were interested in. The second session was the witness blanket, which is about Indian residential schools in Canada. And then the third was about reconciliation. It's a workshop I do about practical ways of working at reconciliation with Indigenous people. And so the woman I had lined up to witness the blanket exercise called me about 3 hours before the event to say she had been in a car accident and wouldn't be able to attend. And so luckily she's fine, but I was in a panic of what am I going to do? And so I started calling different Indigenous friends and people who have witnessed the blanket exercise for me. And I was going through my list and nobody was available, and I was leaving messages and kind of panicking a bit. And so about an hour before the workshop was to start, Patty Victor, a friend of mine, and she is the CM at Trinity Western University, which basically means a wise elder for the university. And she is also somebody I would consider a mentor. She called me to say that that she would get there. She might be late. She had worked all day at the university. She had an extra meeting that day from 5:30 to 6:30 at the university, but then would leave there and come directly to the church without eating or anything, and would show up to be there for me. I was quite moved by that friendship, by that willingness to come in such a last minute request and be there for me. And she witnessed the learnings that happened during the exercise, but then she also used our friendship as an example of reconciliation and how meaningful it can be. And so that was a real blessing to me. So then the third story that I want to share is about Highland Community Church. I do a book study every fall. I have for the last 3 years, and I'm planning to do a virtual one this fall. And I have used the Totomac book series that MC Canada actually put out. There's some really great conversational books to address different Indigenous topics. And so several members of Highland Community Church had attended a couple of my book studies, and they went to their pastor and said, we really want you to meet with Bridget and find out how to have her come to the church and work with us about Indigenous relations work. And so I did. I met with the pastor, had a couple of coffee meetings with him, and then was invited to do the Kairos blanket exercise on a Sunday afternoon around 2 o'clock after church was done, and 50 people showed up. And I needed somebody, again, some Indigenous friends to come, and Elder Maureen Kennedy and Beverly Lightfoot were the 2 people who came to share during that event. And during the Kairos blanket exercise, after you complete the participatory walkthrough, there's a time of debriefing in which we go around the circle and we debrief the exercise. And one woman broke down in tears as she shared that one of her family members had been a teacher at one of the residential schools. And the weight of that and what happened and how she felt was just overwhelming. And Elder Maureen, who would later share about trauma she experienced and the abuse she experienced at residential school, she stood up and she walked over to the woman and gave her a big hug. And that was just a great exemplified act of reconciliation in my mind and in the mind of everyone there. Lastly, I want to just mention that church constituents often ask me about how to make friends with Indigenous people. I don't know an Indigenous person, and I don't know how to become friends with somebody. And there's not really a process for becoming friends with an Indigenous person. It's like any other friendship. You have to put yourself out there and spend time with the person. I found many ways to develop friendships over the past 5.5 years. Some have happened naturally just by attending Indigenous events and meeting people like Patty Victor, her son, Chief Andrew Victor, Mary Fontaine, Shirley Hardman. I could name so many. Several of them are in that photo. Also, just through introduction, people have introduced me, whether they're a non-Indigenous person or Indigenous person, they've introduced me to other Indigenous people, and I've developed friendships. And lastly, sometimes it's just a direct request because I'm working with a church and I need somebody in that community, an Indigenous person in that community, to connect. And so I search out who that person would be, sometimes through a band office or somebody who's related to or has lived in that area who can direct me. And then I become friends with them. So there's not really any special formula. It's introduce yourself, ask questions, learn about them, listen to their elders, but share your heart for reconciliation and understand what kinds of reconciliation actions they're interested in exploring with you. And 1, 2, 3, you have an Indigenous friend in your life and they will bless you immensely. I will end there and say, hi, Cho. Thank you.
Bridget, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you gave a lot of very practical, very hopeful examples of engagement, especially between congregations and some individual friendship stories too, especially your last comments. One of the questions that has come in here, which I might just put to you to think about, because in many ways I think you've answered it already, but you might want to say more. Someone has said, what are some of the best ways we can enable church members to have meaningful relationships with Indigenous people in our province? This question happens to be from Alberta. So I'm just going to leave that with you, and Beverly may want to comment on it as well. But we'll circle back and give you a chance on that one later on, Bridget. But Beverly, we saw your picture a moment ago, and now we're going to meet you and give you some time to present. Welcome, Beverly.
Here I am. I minimized it and I couldn't figure out how to maximize it again. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Bridget. Dansana Wakamakanak. In Cree, that means hello, my relatives. Nitsigasun no si wapi masqua esquel. In Cree, that means my name is White Female Bear. Egwa Munya Wikowin is Beverly Lightfoot, and my white given name is Beverly Lightfoot. I'd like to acknowledge also that the lands that I am coming and speaking on and joining you today are the ancestral traditional territories of the Coquitlam First Nation. And I think it's important that when we meet where we live, where we work, where we play, that we always acknowledge the traditional lands that we are gathering, residing, living, working, or playing on. I'd like to thank Bridget because, you know, as she was talking, I was just thinking how much of beautiful work that she does, you know, and I have a biased opinion. I love Bridget and I just love the work that she does. So when she asked me to join her today and be witness to the work that she's done in communities and the meetings that I've been able to join with, of course, for me, it's an honor to be asked to do that. So because I've been able to witness the work that she's done with communities with, she spoke just about where was it? The Highland Community Church Caro's blanket exercise that she did, where I was with the elder Maureen Kennedy. I'm gonna put my glasses on, I can't see very well. I just wanna share with you that after I drove the elder home, she was absolutely amazed at the genuineness of the individuals who came to join. And there must have been at least, I don't know, 50 people there. It was a really beautiful, humbling experience for me as an Indigenous person to have so many individuals come to gather to learn. You know, even just thinking about it, I just feel like tearing up because it was so, you have to be there to witness it, to experience it. And it's like together, there was so much healing in that room together as a group. And the elder that came with me, Maureen Kennedy, saw that and witnessed it. And she's mentioned it a few times since then. And, you know, mentioned the beauty of it all and how genuine everybody was. So I'm going to go ahead and share my short little PowerPoint here, if that's okay. You'll have to bear with me with my technical side is not so technical. I lost you. Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
That's good.
So I just wanted to share more of a personal story. You know, I've done a lot of work on with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the UNDRIP, and gaining a lot of knowledge there. But I just wanted to share today from me bringing into this Zoom meeting what reconciliation is for me, and how that applies to the work that the Mennonite Central Committee is doing in communities and the work that Bridget does. Okay, so. Oh, there we go. So this is a photo of St. Anthony Onion Lake Residential School, which was a Roman Catholic residential school. And as Rick mentioned already, I'm originally from Saskatchewan. I'm Nahiawak, so I'm Cree, and I do have European descent, but for any of you who understand the Indian Act, it is because of the Indian Act that I actually don't know what my European descent is. My mother, at that time, if she had put on the records my European descent, she would have lost her Indian status. So to this day, I don't know what my European descent is. And, you know, I have one of those ancestry.ca sitting on my desk for the last year. And I'll get to it. I know I will. It's a healing journey for me. Everything is. So yeah, so I think I might be Ukrainian or French, but I'm Cree from Saskatchewan. So this picture is the Onion Lake Residential School where my mother attended. In this part of reconciliation for me was reconciling and forgiving not just the system of colonialism, but also forgiveness for my mother. My mother grew up in this school and did not learn how to parent. And I don't need to share the harms that are associated with her upbringing in this school, but it was quite extensive. So our upbringing in my family, not best, of course, because my mother, she didn't know how to parent. And because of the traumas that she experienced, she suffered from alcoholism and drug abuse. So that reflected more in her parenting as well. So part of forgiveness for me was first forgiving my mother, but in part of that forgiveness came from attending residential school survivor circles. Back when the Residential School Agreement Act was being brought out, there was opportunities for communities. For about 2 years, the government gave some money to residential school survivors societies to hold healing circles. So I attended those to learn more about the experience that my mother experienced, because the stories that she told me were so atrocious, and she was intoxicated most of the time. I didn't quite, it was hard to believe. So I attended these residential school survivor circles, and this was after my mother passed away. You know, I cannot say that my mother is a residential school survivor, because she, you know, she actually didn't survive. She, at a very young age, passed away at age 49. So I attended these residential school survivors circles, and I got to learn more about the experiences of my mother and my family and myself. I also attended Indian day school, Moosomin Reserve Indian day school myself, and experienced trauma there as well. So this was a whole healing journey for me. And in this healing journey, you know, is forgiveness. I guess you know, a good friend of mine told me a story about his Oma. And we were just talking today, and how his Oma said to him, you know, we can forgive, but we won't forget. So, but forgiveness is the true act of love. And so this was a journey for me. And I just wanted to share how important it is for me to be able to participate with Bridget when she offers these participatory Caro's blanket exercise on learning about residential schools and the whole history of colonization. Because part of the healing journey for me was also, see, I work with my head. So mentally learning about all of this history of colonization and what it has done to my people, myself, my mother, myself, my siblings, and how it's still affecting us today is very important for me as a learner. So so that's why, I mean, I've done a lot of learning and knowledge, and read a lot of books about TRC and UNDRIP and lots of other learning, but forgiveness for me was the big key jump for my reconciliation of self. And then, you know, what is reconciliation? Of course, we have definitions of what reconciliation is, but restoration of relationship, again, back to my healing journey as what reconciliation means to me, is for restoring the right relationship with God. Because not only was that forgiveness for, you know, the whole what colonization has done, but and also forgiveness of what the impacts were on my mother and my upbringing. Also, growing up, I could not help but have anger towards God. And it took healing, and it took a journey to even acknowledge that. So that now today is a more of a, I am grateful for the experiences that I have experienced. I feel that it's knowledge that I have through this experience that I feel honored to have on my tool belt. And I understand now that even through all of the hardships that I've experienced in the trauma, you know, God was always there with me. And to me, God is love, and reconciliation is love. You know, we say the Lord's Prayer, and forgive us for our sins, and for we forgive those who sin against us. So restoration of relationships for me is that God is love. God has always been love, and God will always be love. In all that I've experienced, in all that, the work that we do, in the relationships with God, with each other, with one another, love our neighbors. And the Bible has so many verses on it. I was going to try to pick a verse, but there's so many. And reconciliation also is action. It's an action word. It's a word of movement. It's transformative. So for me, for reconciliation, I have done a lot of action towards reconciling myself, reconciling my relationship with God, reconciling my relationship with others, and even reconciling my ability to forgive. And to me, that brought movement. So I was able to move beyond the roots of trauma and able to move to a transformative change of love. Reconciliation also reduces barriers and inequities. So, this is a big one, because there are still so many barriers and inequities for Indigenous peoples. And unless we can come together as relationship with each other, and that's a commandment, right? That we are commanded to do that. If we can come to a right relationship with one another, we can reduce these barriers and inequities that are so disproportionate for Indigenous peoples. It's also about re-examining perceptions, biases, and stereotypes. It's an exploration of self and connections. And that's one of the things with the Indigenous Neighbours program that I see really does, is because it forces individuals to reflect on self, on bias and stereotypes. And it also must examine how, and even my European background, although I grew up truly only immersed in my Indigenous culture, however, my privilege of having such white skin is still a privilege for me today. And recognizing how settlers have benefited from the genocide and displacement and the ongoing oppression of Indigenous peoples. So these are the barriers and the inequities that we are still faced with, and need to continue to break down those barriers together as a people, as a whole. I just wanted to share this. It's and maybe perhaps this can be posted somewhere, but it's a quick. It's only like 3 pages, and it's the National Narrative and Reconciliation Report, which surveyed both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians on attitudes towards reconciliation. It's the first of its kind, and also points out to significant barriers to overcome to truly achieve reconciliation. The key findings in the survey actually reveals that Indigenous people and non-Indigenous Canadians share a remarkably similar perspective on most aspects of reconciliation. So the website is, the link is here, so I don't know how we can share that with individuals. But reconciliation is an ongoing dialogue aimed towards restoring relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, which is key to reconciliation. Also, one of the what I wanted to share too about reconciliation, I wanted to share that the church where I attend, the Eagle Ridge Bible Fellowship, I think it was in 2015 or 2016, after the TRC came out, they had done a episodes on reconciliation, and they had asked me to come up and share on the pulpit. And for me, as an Indigenous person, I was a bit conflicted at first. But of course I accepted and was honored to do so. So I was able to go up to the pulpit at my church. This whole movement on reconciliation has been going on for, a good decade. So I remember all that was happening, and they even showed the movie We Were Children, and I think about 30 or 40 people from my church came to watch that movie in a common room upstairs. But they did ask me to come and share, and I shared my story on reconciliation, and I shared my story of my mother because it's important, because my mother always, she always forgave. You know, she always prayed, and she reconciled her relationship with God and with the peoples of the church, because she went to church, she took us to church, and I always thought that was really important for me to acknowledge as an Indigenous person. So I was able to, at my church on the pulpit, bring up my hand drum and, speak what little I know of Cree, speak a little bit. And I was able to sing a hand drum song. And for me, that was transformative for me for reconciliation, because at one time, those songs, the language, the drum, the culture, the ceremony was pagan, was heathen. So for me to be able to do that at my church was very healing for me and very beautiful. So I will always remember that, and I'll share that story with my family and my children, and that just shows the beauty of the Eagle Ridge Bible Fellowship and the Mennonite community. So I've really connected with the church, and I walk both ways. So I've integrated both church as well as continue to follow my traditional ceremony ways. So just last month, I came back from Saskatchewan, and I traveled back home with my children, and I went to Sundance. So we traveled to Sundance. So I've done fasting, I participate in Sundance, participate in cultural ceremonies. So it's very important for reconciliation for me as an Indigenous person to have my cultural roots alive. I want to share next with you a slide with my daughter Ceana, and I couldn't get the font any bigger, but I'm just going to read with you. Ceana, I have 4 children, as Rick has mentioned. Ceana she's my 14-year-old, and she actually Sundanced this summer, and she's done her 2nd year of fasting. So this poem that she wrote when she was 12 years old. And it was a project that she had at school, and it was about identity. And I feel it's important to share because, identity is so important as an Indigenous person. And we are coming out of still a lot of experiences of colonialism that has taken a lot of our identity, but we are growing, and this poem for me was important to share with you because this is who we are and who my children are. I am from the hot water in my shower, from my favorite dance studio, and the traffic on the busy highway. I am from lots of rain to the sound of the doorbell ringing, to the smell of the food in the kitchen. I am from the touches of my dog. I am from Autumn and Tyler, from the sweat lodges and all the powwows and Kaylee. I am from the bannock being made in the kitchen, from the soup as well as strong coffee, from not to chew with your mouth open to eat all your supper. I am from the native and the other stuff too. I am from Cree language being said at my grandma and grandpa's. From the time I fell off the dock at the lake and the time I laughed when I had water in my mouth and spat it all over my project. I am from the photo of me and my family in an apple farm surrounded by trees, a beautiful blue sky with the sun in the air. The photo is important because we were there as family. So I guess, I really wanted to share that poem because, it just rings true to me how family and identity and culture is so important for us as Indigenous peoples. And the work that the Indigenous Neighbours program does is so important because, again, it's coming back to the right relationships with one another as we go forward and try to find ways how to reach our goal of reconciliation across Canada. This is just, Black Elk. He's a Lakota elder. He was a second cousin of Crazy Horse, and John Nyhard wrote a book called Black Elk Speaks. And I just really like this, this quote, because once we were happy in our own country and we were seldom hungry, for them the two-legged and the four-legged lived together like relatives. And there was plenty for them and plenty for us. So, I believe that once again, we can live and be balanced and all be happy because there is plenty. So that's my little blurb on reconciliation. It's, I'm a work in progress still, I sit here today and, I've been clean and sober for over 16 years. So I've gone on quite a journey in my life. And today, I thank God every day for another gift of life, that, another day of life that I've been given today with my family and my friends and my Indigenous Neighbours program family. I have many families, and the church family is one of them too. So there's many things to be grateful for. And I'm just really grateful to be part of this webinar and part of the work that's being done in all the communities across Canada.
Thank you, Beverly. We are very grateful that you've chosen to spend this hour with us. Wow, there are a whole lot of parts of your story that we could pick up here. And I did want to comment on Ceana's poem. Just a reminder to those of you who are listening here, participating, we're eager to hear your questions and happy to have you or make comments. We just had a thank you to you, Beverly, from Erica. I don't know where Erica is, but I'll pass that on to you. I was taken by a number of things. Your comment very early on that you said, you went to a workshop as an adult, I think, on residential schools, in part because the stories you heard from your mom were so atrocious you couldn't hardly believe them. Mm-hmm. That's a really striking reality for a young woman to have to contend with. So I noted that, and then I'm going to fast forward to your sharing of your daughter Ceana's poem, and I partly just thanking you for that, and just giving you a space, if you'd like, to say a little more about the next generation. You talked about your mom, you shared your story. Anything else that you think might be helpful for us to hear about any of your children's journeys that might have been partially illuminated by that poem?
Yeah, one of the things that really helped with my healing was going on a spiritual journey and understanding that I had been cut off from my culture for all those years. I was raised by my great uncle when I was younger on the reserve, but then my mother brought me out to Vancouver and kind of cut the ties with our culture. So part of the journey back to me becoming whole and becoming balanced was learning who I am, learning who the white female bear is, knowing Beverly Lightfoot. So that journey for me was key. When I worked with an elder, and I said I've been clean and sober for 16 years. I worked with an elder in that first year. I want to share with you too, there's been many things in my life. One of them was when I first got sober, a complete stranger stopped me on the street and gave me a book. And that book was called Purpose Driven Life. And that book was instrumental in me because I needed something to read. And I read that book. I read a chapter a day, just like it told me to do. But there was a lot of, God puts us where we need to be at the exact time for people to our lives. And there's so many stories that I could tell you how God has done that for me. He's done divine intervention on many levels. But one of the elders that I work with, Fred John, said to me, I'm going to work with your spirit. And I remember even at that time, I didn't understand what spirit meant. Today now, that was in 2004. But today I understand what spirit is. I understand, more than I can even explain in this webinar, and for those that follow Christ and know God, we know what spirit is. So, but also that spirit was working with my spirit as an Indigenous person, which I had lost. So my children, they have that, and they have all of that. And I feel that they have all the tools to balance themselves in this life, because this life is challenging. It can be difficult. And we need to teach them at a young age to live in spirit.
Well, thanks, Bev, for that hopeful glimpse into the next generation. There are a few questions coming in. Before I pick up on those, I want to go back to Bridget. Bridget, I promised you we would circle back because there was a question that really I think was just asking you to maybe develop a few more of your ideas about congregations, churches enriching their relationships with Indigenous neighbors.
So thanks, Rick. One of the things I do before I start working with a church is meeting with the pastor to get a sense of where that congregation is at. Like how much do they know? Do they know any Indigenous people? Do any Indigenous people attend there? Has there been any interaction with an Indigenous community near them? But also, what is their commitment level? Because this whole reconciliation thing that has kind of really moved since the TRC happened, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the closing of it, and those calls to actions that were put out. It's very easy for churches to say, oh, we should do some Indigenous relations work, and that becomes on the list of the many things that they should do. And then they want to maybe have me come in and do the Kairos blanket exercise or do a workshop, one of my other ones, and then they don't invite me back or go anywhere further. And that is not what reconciliation is. And so one of the things I have learned to do is to find out what their commitment level is, because honestly, if they're thinking of a one-year project and they're going to check a box and it's done, that is not a good thing. They're actually going to end up harming Indigenous people even more so than if they didn't go there, because to invite these people to come into their church and to be part of something or to be part of our workshop and not be committed to furthering that relationship and continuing that walk and that journey, it's hurtful. It's kind of tokenism and just something that they want to say they've been able to do in the congregation. So I really challenge pastors, like, please be ready to make a more long-term commitment to this work. And for instance, with Highland, unfortunately, COVID has kind of not messed everything up, but it's made it much more challenging to go into churches. Churches aren't meeting in person. But Highland had said, I want you to come in every quarter and do something. Like, let's keep a commitment so that we have you back quarterly and we can continue to work at understanding Indigenous people, culture issues, spirituality, and what reconciliation would look like and mean to make that happen. So I say all that in the fact that it's really great to have a church want to do this, but I want to make sure that the church is kind of on the same page with wanting to move forward. Now, in saying that, you're not going to get every member of a church to want to necessarily give time to this, but if there's a core group or a significant segment of the church that's really interested, then going to events and learning. Really, I mean, that's how I've built all my relationships is by learning about Indigenous people, by going to their events and going to different workshops, and just, you know, so that now I can put on workshops because I learned enough to be able to do that. But yeah, like I said, there's not a magic formula. It's about really introducing yourself, being interested in the person, asking them questions, listening to them, hearing their wisdom, because they have a lot of wisdom. I have to say, and this is a little off topic, but the amount of prayer that Indigenous people I know spend their time in, prayer to the Creator and commitment to their family is astoundingly amazing to me, and kind of puts me to shame sometimes. So just to say that they're great people, and it's just a matter of getting to know them.
Well, thank you, Bridget. And in addition to some of the pointers or touchstones you mentioned just now, I also wanted to put in an affirming plug for the blanket exercise, which you talked about extensively in your presentation, as a continuing excellent way for congregations to either start on or continue on this journey. We've just seen that bear such fruit across Canada for many years now. So really glad to know that you're making liberal use of that, generous use of that in churches. Hey, there's a couple of questions that sort of merge together here a little bit. A couple of people are asking about the kind of land and access to resources side of reconciliation. One person is asking about a very particular declaration, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And I wanted to just say a little bit about the way MCC Canada has been working at this. Some of you will know that we have an office in Ottawa, a place where a lot of our advocacy and public engagement work happens, not only on Indigenous issues, but international work as well. And you may also remember that over a year ago, there was a strong movement in Canada to have our federal government adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This was a strong ask, one of the calls to action of the TRC that Bridget's been talking about. So MCC and our Ottawa office put a lot of energy into that. It didn't go quite the way we had hoped, and there's a renewed effort on that afoot again. But in a number of people in their questions tonight have also asked, well, what would that look like? What would it mean? What is MCC asking for with the UN Declaration? And I think one of the key pieces that we've talked about is that it calls for informed engagement, informed dialogue, consultation, consent when there are projects that are deeply impacting Indigenous people, resource projects or transportation routes or pipelines. So without going into a lot of the details about the declaration, I think it has been an area where MCC has put a lot of energy, inviting people to be involved, writing their senators, and to take seriously another side of reconciliation and making sure that Indigenous people are at the table. Another question, it's for either of you, and we don't have a lot of time left, so if any of you are out there still hoping to ask a question, please get that in shortly. So before the question, just some feedback, Bridget. I really appreciate you saying that the commitment needs to be more than just a few sessions. It's got to be substantial. And then actually it kind of merges with the other question. How do we go about building that longer term, deeper, stay with this kind of commitment that isn't box checking and moving on to something else? Any comments? First you, Bridget, and then maybe Bev, if we've got a moment.
Yeah, the commitment needs to be substantial. The question there is any indication on why churches are unwilling to make that commitment. You know, there are a lot of different things that come to churches. Even we have other local programs that MCC does, our homeless prevention and outreach and our refugee, concerns program and all the different end abuse and other programs that we have. And sometimes the people in the church are more passionate or involved in one of those other things. And so they're just not ready or have the time or energy to take on yet, you know, like another area of work that needs to be done. So I don't think that they're unwilling to make it the commitment. I just think often their direction is they're focused in a different direction. And like I met with a pastor, he thought the program sounded great. He was so interested in it, but they already had a 3-year strategic plan in place, and he wasn't going to add this into what was already been approved and what they were working on. And so, you know, understandably, yeah, there's all of those kinds of things. I wanted to actually mention a little bit about the UNDRIP, just in the fact that I know MCC Canada's position. Here in BC, Bill 41 was passed back in November, which is was a similar bill to Bill C-262 to implement the UNDRIP into law here in BC. And so a lot of people in BC have been, you know, kind of frustrated or wondering what that's going to mean. And so again, these are difficult questions to answer, and it means something different whether you're in you're looking at the political side of things, legal systems, if you're at a university, or if you're MCC. And so, I mean, for MCC, it is a framework that we use for reconciliation to help guide us in reconciliation. There's not a legal implementation into an organization necessarily, but it is a guide, and it is the minimum human standards for human beings to have. And so hopefully people can read through that document and would learn a bit more about it. And not saying that everybody is going to agree on it, but I try to inform people of what I think the document is saying and what I hear, not necessarily pushing anyone to take a position. So,
Thank you, Bridget. Bev, we have a couple more moments here before I need to close us out with a few announcements. So we're going to give you the last word. Bev, anything you'd like to add as we wrap up our hour together here?
Yeah, I think the question, Robert, what is the best way to find Indigenous people who will help motivate church groups? I think that's for the church to reach out to not just the church, but the individuals who are attending the church. As an example here, I live in Coquitlam. You know, the gatherings and all of the ceremonies that occur in the Coquitlam First Nation. How about reaching out with those Indigenous communities that where you live, reaching out to those community as an individual, or perhaps someone from your church to do that, to try to find a way to build a relationship. I mean, it needs to start very basic, just by going hello, saying hello, how are you? My name is Bev and I live up the block. You know, how I would like to build a relationship somehow, or like to know more. I think we like to overthink everything, and we have to have this strategic plan, but, you know, really we just need to get back to the basics again. That's just simple relationships are key to so much. There was another question in regards to an individual who put regarding their daughter adopted Indigenous children.
Do you want to make a comment on that, Bob?
Comment? Yes. Yeah. I think keep trying. It's important for individuals who adopt Indigenous children to start them at a young age. That might be just attending powwows. There's a lot of community centers that do Indigenous crafts, or I think it's important at a young age to explore those Indigenous cultures. But at the same time, if the child, or in this case, the daughter, absolutely resistant, you're just going to have to leave it to them. And there will be at some point, I can almost assure that the Indigenous culture will be sought. Yeah.
Bev, thank you for that last pearl of wisdom. And there are a number of comments coming in the chat here that are thank yous to both of you for your honesty, your transparency. And so I want to add my gratitude, the gratitude of Mennonite Central Committee. Bridget, you're a colleague, and Bev, as a friend and partner of MCC, thank you both for being part of this, for making this a rich hour. And to all of you from wherever you tuned in tonight, across Canada or beyond, I'm so glad you joined us. And I'm going to invite you to also take a listen to a new podcast series that MCC has called Relief, Development, and Podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts, and it's a great month, August, to catch up. There's 3 previous episodes out there that look at our work in Haiti, Syria, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And also, round 6 of our webinars coming back to you on the 24th of September. Our next webinar is titled Advocacy for Peace and Justice, Conversations from the Field. So stories of how advocacy in MCC's work makes a difference in the lives of marginalized and displaced peoples. So please join us again in just over a month, and thank you very kindly for being with us tonight as we explored stories of Indigenous neighbors. Thank you for your support of MCC, sharing God's love and compassion for all in the name of Christ. Have a good rest of your day and evening. Thank you for joining us.